The Problem Child by Michael Buckley. He descended from the clouds like an angel, enveloped in a ray of light so brilliant that Sabrina and Daphne had to shoot their eyes and look away. When he landed nimbly on the ground and smiled at the group, the light dimmed just enough so that they could see his face. The man he had been just moments before was gone, his flesh replaced by shimmering crystal, his eyes by blazing fires like two small suns shining down on them all. But when he glanced over at Sabrina, she saw that his transformation hadn't robbed him of his quirky, mischievous grin. He stepped toward her with extended arms, and she stumbled back in fear. His smile quickly turned to a frown. "What are you doing?" Sabrina demanded. "I'm granting myself a wish," he answered. "I wanted to be powerful enough to make the people I love happy. I've been miserable. Happy is better. You can be happy too. Wish for something, Sabrina. Anything. I can make it happen." "But look at the cost," Granny Rhoda said as she hovered over Mayor Charming's rapidly aging body. His beloved Snow White lay next to him, reaching with bony, arthritic hands to touch his wrinkled face. Everywhere Sabrina looked, ever afters lay struggling against the sudden onrush of old age. Many were in the final throes of death. "Don't cry for them," the glittery being said to the old woman. "The ever afters have had their day in the sun, and it was a long, long day. With their power, I can recreate this world as a paradise where happily ever after isn't just for a bunch of bedtime stories come to life. It's time for all our dreams to come true." Chapter 1. 5 days earlier. Sabrina opened her eyes and saw a monster hunched over her. It was nearly 15 feet tall, with scaly skin, 2 black leathery wings, and a massive serpentine tail that lashed back and forth. Its feet and hands were enormous, nearly as big as its body, and its teeth at the end of a long, snake-like neck was nothing but teeth, thousands of jagged fangs gnashing in her face. A drop of saliva dripped from the creature's mouth and landed on her forehead. It was as hot as molten lava. "Jabberwocky!" the monster roared. Too afraid to move, Sabrina closed her eyes and did the only thing she could. She prayed, "Please, please, please, let this be a bad dream." After a few moments, she slowly lifted one eyelid. Unfortunately, the monster was still there. "Fudge," Sabrina whispered. "Well, good morning," a boy's voice came out from somewhere in the room. Sabrina knew its owner. "Puck? Did we wake you? So sorry. Could you get this thing off of me?" said Sabrina. "It's gonna cost you." "What?" "I figure if I'm going to have to save your butt every time you get into trouble, I might as well be paid for it. The going rate for this kind of job is $7 million, Puck said. "Where am I going to get $7 million? I'm 11 years old. "And I want all your desserts for the next 6 months, Puck added. The monster roared in Sabrina's face. A long purple tongue darted out of the beast's mouth and licked her face roughly. "Fine," Sabrina cried. Puck leaped into the air, flipping like an Olympic gymnast, and clung to a dusty light fixture hanging from the ceiling above. Gathering momentum, he swung down feet first into the monster's horrible face. The creature stumbled back and roared. Using the monster's face as a springboard, the nimble boy flipped again and landed on his feet with his hands on his hips. He turned to Sabrina and flashed her a mischievous grin, then pulled her to her feet. "Did you see that landing, Grim? I want to make sure you get your money's worth." Sabrina scowled. "How long was I unconscious?" she asked. Her head was still pounding from the smack the beast had given her upon her arrival. "Long enough for me to get old, big and ugly, yet pretty angry," Puck said, as the brute recovered and rushed at the children at an impossible speed. Two enormous pink streaks wings popped out of Puck's back and fluttered wildly. Before Sabrina knew it, she had snatched the back of her coat and was pulling her into the air, narrowly avoiding the beast's attack. The wall they had just been standing in front of them wasn't so lucky. The force of the monster's assault sent it crashing down. "I've got the big one," Puck said as he set Sabrina back down on the floor. "You take the little one." Sabrina followed his gaze. In the far corner of the room was a small child wearing a long red cloak that hung to her ankles. She sat on a dirty hospital cot next to the unconscious bodies of two adults, Henry and Veronica Grimm, Sabrina's parents. How Sabrina had gotten into this particular situation was a long and almost unbelievable story. It started a year and a half ago, when her mother and father had mysteriously disappeared. The only clue the police had found was a blood-red handprint pressed on the dashboard of their abandoned car. With nothing else to go on and no next of kin as to step in as guardians, the police were forced to put Sabrina and her 6-year-old sister, Daphne, into foster care. That's when things went from bad to worse. The girls were bounced from one foster home to the next, each filled with certifiable lunatics who used Sabrina and Daphne as maids, gardeners, and once as a couple of amateur roofers. By the time their long-lost grandmother had finally shut them down, Sabrina didn't think she could ever trust anyone again. Granny Rhoda didn't make it easier either. They hadn't been in the old woman's house 10 minutes before she started telling incredible stories about the girls being the last living descendants of the Brothers Grimm, whose book of fairy tales, she claimed, wasn't a collection of bedtime stories, but a history of actual events. Granny Rhoda also told them that their new hometown, Fairyport Landing, was filled to the brim with characters straight from fairy tales, who now called themselves Ever Afters and lived side by side with the normal inhabitants of the town, albeit in magical disguises that hid their true identities. Sabrina, Granny's stories sounded like the silly ravings of a woman who had forgotten to have her prescriptions filled, but there was a dark side to the story as well. These Ever Afters didn't just live in the town, they were trapped there. Wilhelm, the younger of the Brothers Grimm, had put a spell on the town to prevent the Ever Afters from leaving and waging war on humans. The spell could only be broken when the last member of the Grimm family died. Sabrina warned her sister that the old woman's stories were nonsense, but once Rhoda was kidnapped by a 200-foot-tall giant, Sabrina could no longer deny the truth. Luckily, the girls found a way to rescue their grandmother, and ever since they had taken on the family responsibility of being fairy tale detectives, solving the town's most unusual crimes, and going head to head with some of its most dangerous residents. As they solved one mystery after another, the girls had started to uncover a disturbing pattern. Every bad guy they found at least was a member of a shadowy group known as the Scarlet Hand, whose mark was a blood-red handprint, just like the one the police had found in Sabrina and Daphne's parents' car. Sabrina knew one day she would come face to face with the group's leader and her parents' kidnapper. And now, as she stared at the strange little girl in the red cloak, she was shocked. She had never thought the person behind all her misery would be a child. Sabrina clenched her hands into fists, ready to fight her parents' captor, only to have a pain shoot through her left arm that nearly knocked her to the floor. It was broken. She shook off the agony and fixed her eyes once more on the child. The little girl was barely as old as Daphne, but her face was the twisted, rage-filled mess of an adult, barely holding back the insanity behind her. Sabrina had seen a man with that expression on the news once. The police had just arrested him for killing 5 people. "Get away from my parents," Sabrina demanded as she approached the girl and grabbed her cloak in her good hand. "This is my mommy and daddy," the little girl shrieked as she jogged away. "I have a baby brother and a kitty cat too. When I get my grandma and my puppy, then we can all be a family and play house." The girl raised her hand. It was covered in what Sabrina hoped was red paint. She turned and pressed it against the wall, leaving the all too familiar scarlet print. The handprints were everywhere, on the walls, floors, ceilings, windows, even on Sabrina's parents' clothing. I don't need a sister, the girl continued, but you can stay and play with my kitty cat. She pointed at the monster, which was batting at Puck with its enormous clawed hands. The fairy boy was leaping out of the way of the beast's every swipe. He couldn't keep it up for long. The little girl's kitty was lightning fast. It whipped its tail at Puck, barely missing him and sending a dusty filing cabinet careening across the room. The drawers belched open and hundreds of yellowing documents spilled out. Sabrina turned back to the little girl. "Who are you?" she asked, but the child only smiled and reached into her pocket. She removed a small silver ring and slipped it onto her finger. A crimson light engulfed the little girl and Sabrina's sleeping parents. "Tell my grandma and my puppy that I'm coming and I'll see them soon. Then we can play," the demented child said in a sing-song voice. She raised her tiny hands and suddenly the monster stopped fighting. It turned to the girl and its ferocious face became calm. "Kitty, we need to find a new playhouse. Burn this one down." The little girl giggled, and then the world seemed to stretch as if someone were pulling on the corner of Sabrina's vision. And in a blink, the strange child vanished into thin air, taking Sabrina's parents with her. "No!" Sabrina cried and rushed to the empty bed. The monster opened its enormous mouth and a burst of flames shot out. The folding blinds on the dingy windows ignited and flames crept up the walls, turning the weathered wallpaper into ash. The beast blasted another wall and another, sending sparks and cinders in all directions. Within seconds, the entire room was on fire. "Sabrina, duck!" Puck shouted. Sabrina did as she was told, just as the monster's molten spray shot out inches above her head. It roared in frustration and smacked Puck with its long tail, sending him flailing across the room, where he crashed against the wall and tumbled to the floor. His shirt caught on fire, and Sabrina rushed to him, patting out the flames before the boy was burned. Puck crawled to his feet once more and stepped between Sabrina and the monster, which stood over them, jaws dripping. The boy snatched up the little wooden sword he kept in his belt and bonked the beast on the snout. "Come on, ugly, I'm just getting started." But before Puck could take another swing at the hulking thing, a terrible groaning sound came from above, and a huge section of the ceiling collapsed right on top of the beast. The two children staggered back from the pile of smoldering debris that now stood where the creature had been. Puck grabbed Sabrina and dragged her to safety as what was left of the ceiling rained down around her. "I think this party is over," he said. "Wait!" Sabrina shouted. "There could be a clue here to where she took my parents." "Any clue is kindling now," Puck said, pulling her down the hallway. "If you get killed, the old lady will never let me hear the end of it." They passed by open rooms with doors torn off their hinges. Inside, Sabrina saw hospital beds, rusty metal cots, and more sheets of yellowing paper scattered on the floor. Everywhere was the horrible red handprint. "What is this place?" Sabrina wondered. The children rushed on through the choking black smoke until they found a door with the word exit over it. When Puck forced it open, a blast of icy wind nearly knocked them both down and blew snow in their faces, blinding them. Puck shielded his eyes with his hands and peered between his fingers. "We're in the mountains, I think," he shouted. "Can you fly us out of here?" Sabrina said. "The wind is too strong." Puck helped her out the door, wrapping his arm around her and guiding her through the snowdrifts. They'd barely taken a dozen steps when the wall of the building exploded behind them, sending brick and mortar flying in every direction. Into the gaping hole stepped the massive scaly foot of the creature. Its head followed, whipping around on the monster's long neck as its fiery eyes searched for the children. When it spotted them, it let out a prehistoric roar that sent snow tumbling from nearby trees. The children raced away. That's the end of this video. I'll send more later. Goodbye.